So now the time is 15:08 on Wednesday, the 3rd of June 2026. So with the case of Hampshire Police collaborating with the terrorists involved in that incident, and you have to call it terrorism because they were an immigrant, there was a gang of them, they were foreign, they were with their own culture in the UK with a very large weapon out on the streets at night. So they're that religion that needs to have that. What nightclub or pub did they go into on a night out? Why were they out on a night out as a gang on a night out? Where do they go? Where do Sikhs go on a night out? On a night where there's going to be known British people on a night out in the UK, having a drink, going into a pub with their mates. When do Sikhs go into a pub or a nightclub? Why were they? What was their reason for being out at that time of night with a large knife, other than to be in a certain place at a certain time to pass young university students going about their evening, coming out of places with their mates on their way home so they can antagonise them, chase them over fences and stab them to death, which the police then collaborate with and help to kill them before an ambulance can arrive on the scene. And when you get politicians excusing that behaviour and failing to act, first of all, they failed to define it accurately as terrorism with state terrorism, collaboration with terrorism. They have failed to define it for what it is. When do Sikhs go out on a night out? What reason and what right do they have to be out on an evening, on a night of the week, when the UK young population, when UK people go out for a drink? Surely that's just asking for trouble. Why are they carrying a knife of that size as a gang? Why is the Prime Minister excusing it? Why have Hampshire Police been excused of their part in it? Because they would have died anyway. They would have died anyway. What rights do they have to make that statement? That's libelous. What evidence do they have? This should again be a public, full and frank inquiry and trial. This should have been a public trial. There has to be another trial involving the perpetrators that collaborated with it, Hampshire Police. And immediately when it happened, the police commissioner, Donna Jones, Alan Mack, MP, who's heavily involved in Hampshire Police, he's heavily involved in Hampshire Police, and he's a football crazy who during COVID in 2020, when we were in lockdown 1, he was petitioning the government, not for community things that everybody needs in the community, not for the potholes being filled in, not for the hedges being cut, not for the parks to be regenerated, not for cycleways to be upgraded, pavements to be in a fit standard, not for dogs to be on leads and for people to be behaving correctly with animals. No, he was petitioning the government for a very large sum of money for AstroTurf at Havant and Waterlooville Football Club. So he was sponsoring Havant and Waterlooville Football Club in lockdown 1 and kitting it out with new AstroTurf and creating family patterns, enforcing by oppression, using Hampshire Police to create footballers out of children, other people's children, by oppressive family patterns, oppressive terrorist states during that time, since 2015. He and David Willits together have worked with others to end to close out homeopathy from the NHS, shutting it all down in the UK by 2019. That is not separate from these cases. So that's who they are, that establishes who they are. So the Prime Minister, because the Police Commissioner and the MP had failed to act swiftly, to investigate themselves, to turn themselves in and say, look, we put our hands up, we're ever so sorry, we're employing people we shouldn't be employing, they're not fit for purpose. They've clearly collaborated with the murderers in this case, as they usually do, as many people keep reporting on false arrests, whoever's survived false arrests, whoever's got away with the murders. So then they should have been investigated, they should have been arrested immediately, detained and held in custody and charged with the gross misconduct for employing indecent, unfit officers for purpose and for conducting that behaviour. And because that never happened, Keir Starmer has to take responsibility for failing to intervene when that never happened. There should have been a full and frank public trial involving those officers on trial as defendants in the matter, to answer to why they acted with callous, no empathy, to treat a victim like that. They didn't even do a full assessment. They should have assessed him before they did that to him. It is not the law, it is not good practice, it's not right practice to arrive at the scene and to instantly handcuff somebody without evidence or any warranting of it. Somebody who's slumped on the floor, semi-conscious, who can barely speak. You do not drag them across the floor and put handcuffs on them. You don't know what's happened. You arrive, you should be impartial. And you should use your senses when you arrive to fully assess. Separate the parties, protect the evidence, take photographs. Where was their cameras? Get a light, shine the light on the person on the floor. There was no light. Somebody should have been setting up tape, putting tape around it, cordoning it off. They should have put a light on the victim and assessed him fully and checked immediately if an ambulance was needed. Removed the perpetrator from the scene and then an ambulance would have been called. They would have put him on his side in the recovery position or left him as he was. They would have sat by him, reassured him and been on the line to a paramedic. That's what should have happened. So because that didn't happen, Keir Starmer has to intervene as the UK leader and ask questions why the police commissioner has not acted to take responsibility for those very callous officers. And the point of this blog is, because obviously everyone's talking about this, the point of this is it's created civil unrest. Well, it's bound to, because not because necessarily of what's happened, but because of the blatant excusing, the cover-ups, the failures to act swiftly to deal with the state terrorism that we've been under since 2015, where there's many reported cases of false arrests, people being harassed and stalked by police, Alan Mack voting for surveillance and really being involved in heavy stalking of victims, surveillance, satellite tracking, phone tapping, and not of drug dealers but of the victims, of females for supply, innocent people, and for them, their officers colluding with perpetrators and being on their side. This is not an isolated case. There are many that have been murdered by Hampshire Police, some with intent, some with manslaughter, and they've been covered up. People have been falsified, misrepresented, and that's not acceptable. And that the fact that people are rising up and feeling inflamed isn't necessarily because of what's happened, it's because of the failure to respond and take responsibility for it immediately, to arrest and detain those officers and the police commissioner and the MP involved. They should have been arrested and taken in for questioning. How has this happened? None of that has taken place, and so this is the outcome that we now have.